I'll just pull a TikTok. Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really great to see so many of you, and also thank you to the panelists who are able to make it. So the main idea here is to work with these amazing local professionals in order to talk about how to get in a career around the games or tech world, as well as your own experiences, both helping others get a job, as well as your experiences getting a job. I'm Chris Filip. I am the co-founder of Game Anglia, and my background in games has been studying at university and then getting a job with a graduate program at Ubisoft, which was absolutely amazing. And then I worked with with a number of younger studios, more indie, before going into, well, starting Game Anglia, but also discovering that a lot of what I've done throughout my life and everything that I enjoyed was helping others. So I pivoted a little bit, and now I work not only with game studios, but also with like film and TV producers, as well as the work that I do as a volunteer director at Game Anglia. So yeah, would you all like to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit more about how you initially got into the industry that you're in, and kind of like the route that you took, because I think there's quite a few myriad routes between us.
Hello. So my name's Jake Saterlay. I'm a technical lead at AST Networks, a company in Great Yarmouth who specialise in communication solutions. I started my career at university. I studied computer science at Kingston. And I got my first job just straight out of uni at a agency in London who made voice games for Amazon Alexa, which was really fun. I then decided I wanted to move back up to Norfolk to be closer with family. So I got a job as a web developer at a company that made boiling water taps, which is quite the transition. I then unfortunately got made redundant from that role a couple of years ago now, and joined AST Networks. And yeah, I recently got made technical lead in January. So that's pretty much my story so far.
I feel like there is a pun there about being made redundant from a boiling tap water company.
Yeah,
I might come up with it by the end of today's session.
Thanks. Oh, I have a loud voice. Okay, that's not so bad. So I'm Chris. I am the lead DevOps engineer at Artlist. We have an office down the road, but we're a global company. I don't work in the games industry at the moment. For those of you who don't know, Artlist is a creative technology company that has a catalogue of high-quality assets like videos, music, sound effects. But the reason I got into that company was because I've had a long history of trying to write games. I love playing games. And as a company, we do a lot of special effects for video editing software, so there's a lot of overlap there. Liking games from a young age, I learned to program like when I was maybe 10, and when I was 10, I said I really want to be a games developer. So throughout my education, I focused on courses where there was game development, courses on there was computer programming. I went to the UEA, did School of Computing Science, all the undergraduate degrees that focused on computer graphics elements. I then did a PhD with a focus on computer graphics and simulation. Following that, I then thought there's kind of two options. You could kind of go out into the games industry. At the time, Norfolk wasn't particularly like a big games. There wasn't that very many opportunities. You'd have to go further afield. And during my studies, I found that actually a lot of the skills that you learn in computer graphics can be applied to other areas like medical imaging. So I did some research into medical imaging, things like CT scans, X-rays, trying to create 3D structures from people's scans. Strangely, I then moved into cloud technology. I did a bit of bioinformatics and then computer vision before then making a transition to Aviva, where I worked as a DevOps engineer, and then finally to my role today at Artlist as lead DevOps. So it's kind of a bit of a mix, but graphics has kind of always been at the core of my interests and hobbies and stuff like that.
So I'm Harry. I'm also a software engineer at Artlist. I work with Chris. I work opposite to Chris.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, so I graduated UEA with Computer Science in 2020, I believe, and I got my first job at a company called Cloud Imperium Games. They make a game called Star Citizen. You may or may not have heard of it. It's actually the world's biggest crowd-funded project. They've raised over like $700 million, I believe now. But it's basically a very big space simulator game. They've been working on it for like 12 years now. But yeah, I worked there for like a year and a half until I then moved to Artlist. I moved from there because they were going back to working in office. I didn't want to move to Manchester because that's where they're based. So yeah, I found a local company here. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's what I'm doing right now.
There's only a 4.5 hour each way commute to Manchester. Just saying, from Norwich, there's a direct train.
Yeah, I didn't fancy it.
Hi everyone, I'm Russ. I'm slightly different to the rest of the crew here. I'm actually a recruiter, after we call ourselves talent acquisition specialists today. I'm a local boy. I've been recruiting in Norwich for around 30 years. Started off with industrial recruitment and worked my way up to become head of global recruitment for a CAD/CAM design company across Europe, specializing in mechanical design, data management, cybersecurity, lots of really uninteresting subjects. I got made redundant at the age of 52 and found myself wanting to put something back and not allow people to go through what I was going through at this age and what I went through as a youngster as well, because I was a programmer back in the 1980s. I used a computer called a VIC-20. I released my own games, and there was no games industry. There was no support. There was nowhere for me to go. And at some point, that's constantly been in the back of my mind, is helping people who have talent, have ability, and helping them overcome their challenges, whether that just be with applications, neurodiversity, literally whatever block is getting you away from your dream. I'm there to try and help make that dream come true. And if that dream can't come true, to keep the dream alive but keep the bills paid at the same time. My little agency, Time for Talent, is pro bono. We don't charge anyone for our services. We may develop that later on, but at the moment we're here to help anyone with any kind of CV, portfolio, advice, guidance we can give, just to try and help you pay the bills if need be, while keeping your dream alive. And before I waffle on, that's where I'll cut myself off.
No, thank you so much, Russ. And I think it would be good to get a bit of show of hands from the room in terms of if anybody here is currently looking for a job. Okay. So you have a few people to chat with after this, but part of the reason why I wanted to do that is to just try and focus the panel a little bit, because recruitment and applying for jobs on both sides of the table can be quite an exhaustive process. And as somebody who has also recruited people across a number of organizations over the past few years, I can tell you that quite often you are never sure whether you're making the right decision. So I'm just going to hand quickly over to the people in the panel and ask if you if your role touches on recruitment. So have you ever interviewed people in your role or past roles? Have you ever built tests, or did you even like maybe contribute to interviewing, like when you're in the room when you're interviewing people, like virtually or in person? Anyone?
I might as well start as the recruiter. I've lost track of how many interviews I've done, so I think a good measurement is last year I enrolled over 300 people onto a gaming boot camp, and that's the kind of volume that I can have dealt with. I've done specialist headhunting recruitment, where you've gone out and spent months searching for that one unicorn candidate, only for the MD not to like them at the final hurdle kind of situation. As I say, I've recruited probably every sector you can think of, been through every kind of recruitment process, and I personally take my personal experiences and generate them back into the guidance I give. So there's a lot of influencers out there will say, hey, this is how you approach an interview, this is how you approach your CV. I do it from experience, and if I don't make it work, I don't teach it. If I make it work, then I will teach it, as it were. So I could probably take up the entire panel of my experiences on that one. So probably a more guided question, probably more focused question. I'll come in a bit later. Who wants to go next? You can see it in your eyes.
I ain't got much to say.
You've got.
It works really well, because if you've got a lot of experience in an interview, I was literally going to say I don't really. Why not? So yeah, I don't actually have that much experience interviewing in my current role. I have interviewed in the past. I have been part of reviewing CVs, assessing candidates, but it's been very, very light experience. And my point was going to be that actually it works out really well if you can talk a lot about it, because I can't talk that much about it. But I have been interviewed, which hopefully is a good thing as well.
Your own interview experiences are actually great learning curves, so it actually does contribute. If you've been through a painful experience, or you've been through an experience that the candidate experience wasn't great for you and you got treated like trash like a lot of companies do, then that's the kind of thing is really experienced and valuable. So don't underestimate that, because that's how I learn how to adapt what I do to make sure that you don't go through that horrible experience of being ghosted, 8 interviews, all that kind of thing. I use that experience to try and go into companies and say, hey, 5 or 6 interviews for this one role is just ridiculous. How much money are we spending? How much time are we taking away? How much is the candidate experience? If 8 stages and then you still get ghosted. And I think every company at some point is responsible for doing that. So one thing I do like to do is go into companies and tell them, stop doing that. Yeah.
What you, Jake and Harry?
Yeah, I mean, I've not really got any experience.
Okay, no, that's totally fine.
So I've been on both sides of the table really. About 18 months ago, I started being on the interview panel at AST, and it's definitely an eye-opening experience and kind of refreshing to get to be on the other side of the table. But definitely something that we've taken a lot of consideration into recently is trying to refine the process a lot more. Definitely trying to streamline it so that we don't have those 8-step interview process with 3 technical tests, and it's. I've also I built the technical test for the front end team at AST Networks as well. I think some people in the crowd will realise it's one of the hardest technical tests in the county for some reason. But no, I think being out in Great Yarmouth, we've got quite we like people to be on site in our office, so we have a smaller talent pool to pull from, but it's definitely been definitely an eye opening. Yeah.
I think I just wanted to start having this understanding. Where I really wanted to start is to talk a bit about, on one hand, the tech industry that you're working in at the moment, and you've all had experiences comes to games or game-like technology as well, but also when you're looking at tech in and of itself and games, quite often you're going to have varieties of different jobs. However, quite often you will have your CV, cover letter, portfolio, and tests as the overarching 4 things that you need to get right. It might be that for some, the portfolio might necessarily be that important. Others might not have an art test, especially if it's a super junior job. Can we talk a little bit about, for the 3 of you, in terms of your job and getting to the job where you are, what do you feel was important, and how are you applying that, especially the 2 of you who are now sitting in interviews? How are you applying your previous experience when you're now interviewing people for your companies?
So I think for me, what's really important and what I look for when I'm interviewing candidates is the passion that they have for the role. Definitely, I always ask what they do outside of work to keep in touch and keep updated in the industry. I find that's a really good gauge of how we can see how invested you are into keeping up to date, and how passionate you are. It's obviously it's never a requirement to do work outside of work, right? But it's always a good gauge of how you can see how passionate people are for the role.
So you're also interested in what they do outside the job itself?
Yeah, definitely. It's like I said, it's a great gauge to see how passionate they are for the industry.
Hobbies and things.
Oh, hobbies. Yeah, we definitely talk about that as well, because like I said, we like people to be in the office. So it's I think for AST especially, it's definitely as much of a cultural fit as it is for the skill set. So yeah, definitely. We always ask, what I think I got asked in my interview what my favourite food is for some reason, and I'm a big Indian food fan, and that went down really well because we go out for a lot of meals to Indian restaurants. So maybe that's what got me the job. I don't know. I got really lucky. But yeah.
But the test itself is quite important.
Yeah, the test is definitely quite important. Yeah.
I'll go next then. So I don't necessarily interview in my current role, have done in the past very infrequently. But I have
like to as part of your attributions.
Well, yeah, can this happen? I don't know. But yeah, so I think thinking back to my past, what has worked well, what hasn't, and on the times that I did, what impressed me sitting on the other side of the table. And I think for me, when I've been able to demonstrate why I've wanted to join a particular company, or when a candidate's come along and said, actually, I really want to work for you guys because I'm interested in this, I've followed you in the past, I like what you do, I like what you stand for, it actually like makes you think this person really wants to be here, they really want to be part of this team, this culture, this community. And what I would say is when I've interviewed before, I've done a lot of research before I go into the interview. I make sure I've used the products that the company offers. I feel like I can have conversations with the people that are interviewing me to talk about what things have gone well for them in the past, what haven't. I feel like just doing that little bit of research comes across really well in the interview because you seem like actually, yeah, this person's not just applying for 100 roles and just hoping one will land. They're actually really driven and they want to be part of this team, and you feel like if you were then to employ them, they will want to continue being there and work hard for the company. It's interesting you say tests. I've never had a test in an interview. I don't know whether that's just my experience but I've never had a test. I don't know whether that means if I had been tested, I'd never been employed.
It's interesting because I've actually interviewed at Artlist before and I didn't get the role, but I had a technical test at Artlist. I think it was probably a different role, obviously, but it was definitely... it's something that, I'll be honest, I completely bombed the interview. I was super unprepared. I went in and it was way more technical than I thought it was going to be. And yeah, for that reason, I didn't get the job. But it's definitely, like you said, really great to research the company, do all the preparations before, because for that interview, I was not prepared and I didn't get the job. Yeah.
What about you in terms of like when you got your job at CAG and now with Artlist, did you have to go through art-tests as well, or not art-tests, sorry, through the technical tests as well, or?
Yeah, so joining CIG, the way they did it, they had an online leak code style test, so just technical C++ questions. I think they're quite common. That's really something you can just practice, literally go on leak code, just do a bunch of questions until you feel good about them. For me, I think what helped me get the job at CIG was having like my own website with a portfolio of my projects. So if you're an aspiring game dev, you've probably tried making your own games before, and it's really good just to show them off. You can easily make a website on something like Wix or WordPress, make it look kind of professional, just add some videos, pictures of all your projects, and I think that helps to stand out. I certainly think that helped me get the job at CIG. They seem to be really impressed with the stuff I showed off.
Or because I have a slightly different question for you, but before we move on, what I wanted to mention is that most of the interviewing that I've done, and going back to what you said in terms of research, I've mostly been interviewing for support-related roles, program manager, assistants, admins, and so on, coordinators. And quite often, when you're like with Game Anglia, for example, we do not make games. We do not publish games. We do not offer work experience for people who make games. So it's quite important when for the people we've interviewed to see that they wanted to help others. And if somebody comes in and they say, oh, I noticed that you're helping the game sector. Well, my goal is to become a games programmer, a game designer, etc. You're not necessarily going to be the right fit because we're going to end up hiring you. You're going to do well for a while, but then as soon as you can, you're going to get a job that is your actual passion and your actual hobby. So what we ended up doing was quite often we end up hiring people who have experience and passion in helping others, but may not have the experience in games. We can give you that, but we can't like give you the passion to want to help others. Yeah, what I wanted to yeah.
You picked up on a very important point, actually, in regards to social fit. There's a lot of contentiousness whether you should put your hobbies and outside interests on your CV and whether we should even be asking you those questions. For me, actually, If I know that you enjoy curry and there's 5 people in that team who enjoy curry and there's 2 candidates up for that one job, I am more likely to go for yourself because I know you'll be a cultural fit for the company. I know that you will also probably ingratiate with that team a lot quicker and you'll probably stay a lot longer. And as an internal recruiter, that's really important. As an agency recruiter, it doesn't matter. As an agency recruiter, we just want the money. As an internal recruiter, we want to ensure that people stay because its cost is huge to replace you, especially if you're really skilled and if you've been through what I call, I don't use the word test, I use the word challenge. If you've been through the challenges that we set you, that cultural fit is the icing on the cake, and it could be the difference between you and that one other person. So I always say to people, if your hobby is relevant and reading, we all read, we all go walking, but if you really make your own curries at home, and that's the kind of thing you should be putting down because it might be that slight difference, that cultural fit, and it's a hugely important area, especially in gaming. Everyone has to work together in a way that probably you don't in tech. You're more isolated in tech, you're more responsible for your own project management. It's more collaborative, I find, in the gaming community, so that soft fit is really, really important. I just want to pick up on that because that's a really good point. It's quite contentious. There's a lot of people saying, don't put that on your CV. For me personally, I need to see it because I want to see how you're going to get on with the rest of the people in my crew.
No, give me the mic, because one of the things that I feel like you can input into is how do you go from applying to getting to interview? Because quite often, a lot of the people I've chatted with are like, oh, if once I'm in the interview room, I know I can get a job, or at least I'll have a fair shot at it. But quite often, just putting together these relatively abstract things like your CV, cover letter, portfolio, is hard. So do you have any thoughts on how people can increase their chances to end up at that interview? Or for the people who might be interviewing who are in the room with us in the future, any thoughts on how you can give everybody a fair shot?
I think the first thing is always apply for jobs where you have that passion. Because if you're just applying for a job to pay the bills and you haven't got the passion, no matter how hard you try, that passion isn't going to come through. And at some point, you're going to get caught out, whether that's in the pre-screening stage or in the interview stage. At the moment, there is a real battle to make your CV stand out. Personally, I've applied for close to 200 jobs myself in the last year through all the traditional methods. And the one way I've actually picked up bookings in the last 4 or 5 days is just literally getting out there, shaking hands with people like yourself. Networking is key. It is really hard if you're neurodivergent and you don't like putting your face out there as well. So there are other ways behind the scenes that you can network without having to be, in people's faces. LinkedIn, for example, is a great way of just connecting with people without having to broadcast. So it's networking, it's showing an interest in the companies, like I think you said, what is the passion behind it, what is the motivation, you need to show that through. And it's just simple things like make sure that your skills match the job. The days of wild card are disappearing, I'm afraid. It's volume is the amazing amount of, if I put one advert out for a CAD designer or even a junior games, anything junior, I'm going to have 1,000 CVs. So it becomes a bit of a numbers game. It becomes a bit of the ATS system matching up and all that. I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more later. But it's to make sure that you read the job description, you match those skills, you change the wording on your CV to match the language that the company is using as well, simple little touches. But at the moment, to be honest with you, it is a numbers game when it comes to applying. And unfortunately, there is more people applying than there is jobs within our sector, within tech sector as well, generally. So networking is key. Getting to know the people, researching the people. LinkedIn is a great way of finding out. I didn't know anything about you guys, but I know all about you because it's all there on LinkedIn. And you can find out who you're going to talk to, who you need to network with, reach out, build those relationships up before you need them. That's how you can get to stand out in today's age. But simply applying with your CV, that's a numbers game. It's luck, and it's getting harder and harder to do that.
Curious to get your thoughts as well in terms of standing out, but I wanted to pick up on 2 things that you mentioned. The first one is what if you're neurodiverse and you're not really a fan of like going out there and shaking hands? Some of the best connections I've made leading into paid work sometimes have been Discord, Slack, Twitter, LinkedIn. I don't need to be face-to-face with people to be able to do that. Quite often it's asynchronous, and coming from like the person who really enjoys sitting on forums back in the like late 90s, early 2000s, it's something that I'm much better at rather than, you know, meeting up or like going through very socially exhausting, like energy exhausting interactions like in person quite often, like going to a networking event and having to like meet a lot of random strangers. The second thing that you touched on, which I wanted to mention, is when you're you're looking at putting your best foot forward in terms of like CVs and cover letters, quite often both of them tend to be important. It much less if you are in an environment where you have a portfolio, where you have to have like a website or something like that, but it still can be important because it might be that the person who is doing that first sift is only going to look to see if you have a portfolio, but they may not necessarily know how to properly assess the quality of that at a glance, but they'll always be able to like read a CV properly and see if you have the required years of experience or the required understanding of where the company is. Cannot tell you the amount of applications I've gotten from the US for people who are like, oh, I'm happy if you're paying relocation costs, and I was like, we are not for profit. We can't even pay relocation for people in the UK, not to mention visa costs or things like that. But yeah, Jake, in terms of standing out, is there anything else that you wanted to contribute on that?
Yeah, I think what you said about being on Discord servers, things like that. Community is such a big thing, especially for me as well. I'm quite involved in the Norfolk Developers community, and from that I've been able to meet people, not only people that are just friends, but professional connections as well. And I know for a fact that if I was to be in an unfortunate situation where I did have to move on from my job currently, I could, you know, I don't have to go out, like you said, and meet people face to face. I could put a message in our Discord server and say, hey, look, I'm looking for a job now. And there might be that one person who hasn't got a job advert out on LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever, and sees that and knows that, hey, this guy, he's quite active, you know, he's a friend, well, I'm not talking about myself, but friendly guy, you know, whatever, he's, you know, you'll be in their head first, right? I think that's really important. And in terms of making your CV stand out as well, I think that's a really important case. And I know for a fact a lot of people kind of, I'm sure you know as well, just throw their CV out. And I don't think that's particularly the correct way to do it. When I apply for jobs, I tend to tailor my CV and my cover letter to each role that I'm applying for. And also, just not to, like, it is a numbers game, you are 100% correct, but not to throw it out in 100 different places all at once. You've got to keep that smaller sample size, because you can get calls back from companies, and I've been in that situation as well, where I've had a phone call from someone who said, oh, you sent over your CV, we think you're really great, come for an interview. And I was like, I have no idea who I've just spoken to. Like, it's, exactly, yeah. But yeah, I think, yeah, those are.
I was just going to build upon what you said, actually, with networks and connections, and in fact, what you both have built upon. When I said earlier I'd never done a test, maybe the caveat to that is I've always known someone who's working at the organisation, and in hindsight, perhaps the CV process becomes a lot easier if you know people who work at the company, because they can vouch for your experience, they can vouch for your personality, they can vouch for your cultural fit. So applying for roles or being recommended by others definitely helps an awful lot. It's helped me, at least.
The networking side, North Dev, I mean, that's how I've got most of my connections the last 2 weeks, and that's only by being welcomed into those communities as well. It's really important that you feel welcome and you feel part of it. And everyone I've dealt with, even Game Anglia, I've only met recently in the last year or so, and through Mark. And so I know all those connections, and I haven't actually met half of them, and they're all on LinkedIn. And it's not me broadcasting, it's just me, hey, that looks like a good connection, put a connection request in, they connect, and then the next time I'm at an event, I bump into Mark and, hey, I already know you, let's have a good chat. And I think that's the same with North Dev, and I know, as I say, I know about all you guys, because I'm a recruiter, of course I do. But at the same time, that networking without meeting you has led to me then meeting you, and then those conversations have been a lot warmer, a lot more ingratiating. And now my CV is being asked for by people, within our circle. So again, you don't need to go out and press the flesh. Just network on, and Discord I found to be really good. I mean, personally, I find Discord is, because I guess I'm getting old, it's a little bit chaotic for me. So I like the structure of LinkedIn and the kind of professionalism. But Slack, I found a really good one with Slack as well. So yeah, just reinforcing what you've said, and not having a test would probably be an indication that they're already aware that your skill set is already there. So they sometimes, I was actually technically assessed last week and failed for a screenshot artist role. So, and for me, it's a good learning curve. But they already knew I had a certain level of experience, and so it was just to actually teach me how much I needed to refine myself, as it were. But I guess that's really, for you, it's a bit of a different situation. They already know your skill set, and sometimes it's embarrassing to put someone through a challenge when they know you could already pass it. It's a bit of a waste of time. So I'll take that as a bonus.
Yeah. Definitely like a fair test.
Here, I just want to chat a bit about how to deal with failure. So quite often, like as you all mentioned, and as we all know, it is a numbers game. You can be very lucky and have the first job that you apply for be the job that you get accepted into. However, more often than not, you apply, and then if you're lucky, you get a rejection. It might be that you get a rejection 6 months after you applied for the job, or you never get it. Or sometimes you go through like a relatively lengthy interview process just for them to tell you you're in the top 2, and then you just don't make it, right? Because you already had a 50-50 shot at it. But if we start with Harry, have you ever been rejected for a job? And if yes, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I'd say probably one of the worst ones. It's a while back. I applied for a game studio. Couldn't remember the name, but I probably did like 3 or 4 interviews. I don't know what was wrong with the company, but they were really slow at responding, like up to a month between emails, even after me following up, and in the end they just didn't respond. So that's probably one of the most disappointing ones. But in the end, I think you've just got to sort of pick yourself up and sort of apply to the next one. Or if it's particularly disappointing, just give yourself a few weeks break. Don't like drain your soul just constantly applying. Yeah.
And like, I'm just wondering, in terms of like Chris and Jake, if you can talk a bit about rejection on both sides of the table, if you've had to do that.
Yeah, so probably the biggest rejection I had, to be fair, I've been fairly lucky. I hadn't applied for that many jobs, had a very good success rate. So when rejection did come along, it like hit really hard. So whilst I was studying at UEA, I did a lot of like teaching alongside the study to kind of like boost finances. And over that time, during my undergraduate and PhD, there were opportunities to like do postdoctoral research, and typically like the career progression path there is you do that for a little while, you become more familiar with how the department works, you become familiar with how funding works, how grant applications work. And then typically when a lecturing role comes up, they typically have 2, which is one's like a teaching focused one and one's more of a research focused one. A lot of the time there'd be people who were in research positions who would then fit quite nicely into that role because they'd have experience in all of the aspects that the role requires. And there'd been a few times in the past where I'd applied for roles when they came up, like very, very much when I was inexperienced, and got rejected immediately. And that was fair enough, kind of throwing the hat in early just to see what happens. But I remember this was towards the end of my time there, where I'd done a couple of postdocs, had that under my belt, acquired funding for projects, kind of like managed people through projects that I'd got funding for. And we had an interview process that was, I think it was 2 days. It took a lot of preparation. I was very, very focused on getting this job. We kind of had to give a presentation to like a panel of people. We had to say what like the next few years worth of planning was, where you're going to get your funding from. It was quite an intense thing. And I was lucky enough to get narrowed down to, I don't know, there was possibly like 2 or 3 candidates left out of a very, very large pool to begin with. And unfortunately for me, they gave the job to someone else, which is absolutely fair. Completely understand the reasons. But up until that point, I hadn't really experienced much rejection. I'd kind of put all my eggs in one basket, so to speak, kind of thinking, right, that's the path for me. Although I'd had the previous rejections in the past, I understood that those ones were because I just wasn't in the right place. But this time I felt, actually, I'm in the right place now. Getting so close and then hitting that finish line, and I think it was also timing with one of my research positions, the funding, they're usually like a fixed term. So I've done ones for like, you have funding for 6 months to do a project, and then towards the end of the project, you might go and ask for more funding to do something else. So it was coming to an end of that as well. So it would have been really, really good timing. And when I got rejected from that position, I was kind of at an end as to what I was going to do next. I thought that I was ready. So my thinking was, perhaps I'm never going to get a job in this industry. And because my contract was coming to an end, I was kind of fortunate enough to be able to just kind of take a break for a bit. And I think I took about 6 months out. And in that time, I kind of just continued my collaborations in research with the Norwich Research Park DBA, kind of on a voluntary basis. It was kind of, I was doing work, and I kind of continued doing that for the sake of the research, whilst I then took a bit of a step back, not doing it full time, to think about where I wanted to go forward after that point. And as much as it hurt at the time, if I look back at it today, I'd actually say I'm kind of glad it didn't happen, because the journey that I have been on led me to where I am now. And where I am now, I don't think I'm very happy where I am now. And I'm not sure it would have panned out in the same way as before. Obviously, it doesn't help with people I work with and my boss in the audience. But yeah, I think it's trying to understand what the rejection means, having a bit of a step back, like Harry said. Maybe you don't need 6 months like I did. Maybe I just took it really bad. But yeah, kind of reassessing, actually, was I taking this path because it was prescribed for me? I felt like it was the thing I should be doing at that point. And that was what, for me, led me to industry, because up until that point, I was in academia. And then I thought, actually, maybe this is my one shot to kind of cross the barrier and try something different. So yeah, I don't really know what I'm saying here, other than rejection is hard, but if you can find a way to deal with it, come back stronger and take lessons from it.
What about you, Jake? Sorry, Harry.
Just as well, rejection is not necessarily a bad thing. You can learn from it in a technical sense. So interviewing is a skill in itself. You're probably going to be pretty bad at it at the start. I'm still pretty bad at it, but you know, the more you do, the better you'll kind of get at it. You'll sort of realize the kind of questions you need to answer and realize what you need to learn more.
So yeah, I think obviously rejection sucks, but it's kind of an inevitable in most cases. Like when you apply for so many jobs, like you're going to get rejected. It's going to happen, and it's not always a reflection of you at the time. I think like you pointed out, you could get to the last two candidates, and hey, that candidate just has way more experience than you, and they're just a better fit for that role at the time. That means you just got unlucky. Like, and that's what comes back to it being a numbers game, right? But yeah, so it's not always necessarily you're not good enough for the role. It's just maybe you're just not the right fit, or there is a better fit at that time. I think in terms of when I interview, I've made a habit of noting down any questions that I got asked that kind of like threw me off a little bit, and then I kind of like study those questions, so just so I'm more prepared for them in the future. And I think being on the other side as well, having to give rejections and receiving rejections as well. I always ask for feedback if I'm rejected. I think that's really key, and good companies will always give you feedback of your interview process.
Especially if you actually got to the interview.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
But with that, I think there's an interesting trend in what we've discussed, and one of them is it's useful if your job is your passion and you have a passion for that, because that means that you can continue doing it even after you get laid off or you run out of a contract. And the other thing that has to do with like the community, and the fact that if you are embedded into communities, then that's going to help you find a role in, at least in the community, if not necessarily like in position that you wanted to be in. The last thing from my end, and I'll hand over back to you, is quite often it can just be that let me take that a step back. You will get 100% of the jobs that you won't get 100% of the jobs that you don't apply for. And don't underestimate how important it is for you to put your name and the competent cover letter and CV into the pot, because you never know when somebody might be like, oh, either I know this person, or I know what they worked on, or this, like they make their own curries that resonates with me, like let's interview them. Or it might be that quite often nowadays you have certain employers who have a policy to interview 100% of the people who meet the minimum criteria. But if you don't make your cover letter and your CV so that it fits the minimum criteria, even if you might fit the minimum criteria, they won't know, because at the end of the day, unless they know you, all they have is black and white what you submitted. Yeah, sorry, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, if you, like you said, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So if I mean, good job postings will always say the criteria for the job that you're applying for. So if you feel like even you meet just a percentage of those and there's something that you feel that you can contribute to that role, then definitely just throw your CV at it. Well, if you're looking for a job, why wouldn't you? It won't hurt.
And now if we, Russ, what's your thoughts on that?
Don't take rejection personally. It's not you. It's often circumstances beyond your control. Your experience sounds to me as if the company didn't know what it was looking for, which is quite common. There's probably internal battles between hiring managers. The hiring manager has still got to get budget approval. The budget master is looking at their budget and saying, I want to save that money because I get a percentage of that at the end of the year if I don't spend it. So that's a very common situation. So don't take it personally. If you don't apply for the jobs, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get that chance. I can't mention the name of the AAA studio, but I wouldn't be actually on their radar without having applied 3 or 4 times and getting up in their face, and then producing my own artwork and publishing it, and just generally building up that background for them to actually say, actually, he's pretty serious about what he's doing. And they interviewed me, they rejected me, but the feedback they gave me was designed for me to go away and learn it so that next time they can give me a job, because they'd like to give me a job. I just don't have the same technical skills that yourselves have, and I think that's more, it's justified. Why would I get a job when you've been training for it all your life just because I've got a few inside contacts? But I think the number one thing there is don't take it personally, even if it's the final interview. There's numerous reasons why we don't offer, and sometimes, a lot of the time, it's because the job itself is being pulled, or the position's being changed, or even there's arguments. No one, as you guys probably know, you probably argue, you don't even know what the job is that you're really advertising. You're looking for something and you know what it is when it lands. So if you don't apply and you don't try, you're always going to cry. That's what I like to say. If you try, aim high, because one day you might actually, as you say, this person's been applying, they've applied, let's give them an interview, and suddenly you come alive in that interview.
And or it might be that they do, if you also consent to that, keep your details on file, and then a new job comes up two weeks later, and they're like, oh, we already interviewed this person, they'd be great for it. I got a job like that, where they're like, oh, sorry, you're not the right fit. And then literally the next week I got an email saying, well, actually, we decided not to hire anybody for that position, but we have this position, would you like it? Because we already interviewed you. I was like, yeah, I'd like that, yeah, that'd be nice. But the other thing, the flip side of that is that interviewing process and recruitment processes are notoriously long, and they're expensive for companies, which means that quite often, once you have the job offer in your inbox, you're in a position of power, and you can properly negotiate from there. Because otherwise, they're gonna have to go back and like redo the recruitment process, or go back to somebody who they didn't want to necessarily hire, and so on. I have been working a lot with students who are getting their first or second jobs, and my usual take is always negotiate your salary, always ask for more than you get offered if you get the offer first. And so far, nobody's had an offer rejected. Even if it was £500 more, they all got a raise. But I am aware of the time, and I just wanted to talk a bit about Russ specifically, the importance of things like formal educations, your CV, reading the job descriptions as an applicant, and does AI play a part in applying or being recruited? Because quite often you see people who are like, oh, I'm just going to ChatGPT this so that my cover letter mentions some of the key competences. Do you see that on the other side as a recruiter, and do recruiters use AI?
Absolutely. If anyone out there is telling you that AI is not rejecting you, they are wrong. Look at those who are telling you that fact first and foremost and ask, are you actually in a studio or in an organization that uses an applicant tracking system? Because if they're not using an applicant tracking system in the last 2 or 3 months, they're not up to date with new technology. We all have to keep up to date with what you all do, your architects, your coding. So we recruiters need to keep up to date with technology. So I was very fortunate enough to work for an organization just before the Christmas break. My job was to install an applicant tracking system into that organization. So I set it up from the ground upwards, everything from your process of application, your automatic rejection emails. So there's no need for ghosting. You know, we actually have the technology just to press a button. And the next stage is, will AI press that button for us? So AI at the moment is able to summarize your CV in a very short paragraph, and it will give me a recommendation as to whether I reject you or move you forward. At the moment, most recruiters of any integrity aren't trusting the AI. Enough tests I've run through, I could probably do another half-an-hour lecture on some of the tests I've done that have given really made-up results. It's not mature enough at the moment. It's also some self-preservation, because as soon as we allow AI to press the button, even more recruiters are going to be out of work, so we don't want to really encourage that if possible. But it isn't only a little bit of scripting away from it actually taking that decision for you and taking it out of your hands. And so when people say, hey, AI is not rejecting you, technically they're correct, because it still requires me to press that button. But it doesn't take a lot of scripting to put that together, that recommendation turns into an automatic rejection. So at the moment, AI is not rejecting you itself, but it will. And it's going to increase. Its ability is maturing. Its ability to spot your relevance is maturing. But at this moment in time, it's not mature enough for any ethical recruiter to rely on what it says. It is making lots of mistakes. It does miss off a lot of relevant skills. It's really hard for the AI to actually patch together how long you've been in the industry. So if I'm looking for someone with 2 years minimum experience, it struggles to go through. And it's quicker for me just to go 2, 2, 2, and 4. You've got 6 years, you're through to the next round, as it were. So AI is, the other area of AI is a lot of people being encouraged to use AI to apply for jobs. Unfortunately, too many people are then cutting and pasting that AI, and we're seeing exactly the same really non-human sentences, because you don't talk like that, and we can spot that a mile off. You talk organically in the way you write, the way you talk. It doesn't come through. You've got to reflect how you are. And then we're now seeing the birth of anti-AI software. So a great example, you go to LinkedIn, you'll see that there's 100 people who apply for a job within 10 minutes of that job being applied. Well, the first thing, that's just LinkedIn actually saying how many people are being processed, not who's been applied. But what is increasing is people are actually using AI to automatically apply for jobs without them even reading the job description, just to get ahead of the queue. So that's going to give us a vicious circle. So as a recruiter, we'll have 2 choices. We either start implementing anti-AI software, which we do have, and I've switched it on, that can spot you're using AI. It's not hard, because I say that language is not quite developed personally yet. The other thing is, you're just getting into a kind of catch-22 situation. You're using AI to get you to the front of the queue, and now we're using AI to make sure that you actually go to the back of the queue again, especially if you're automating your applications, because that's showing no passion. If you're asleep when your application's gone, you've just ignored everything anyone on this panel has just advised you to do. And you're relying on this thing that's out there to get you the job. And all it's doing is getting you in front of the queue. But at some point, the human's going to look at your CV and make that decision at the moment. So I suggest you use AI to give you suggestions which you personally refine. don't trust it to write your CV for you. I've run so many experiments on that, and it just makes up skills and experience I've not had. I think I spoke earlier on again, and we could go into depth, but just changing a word to try and match it so that I reflect the language of the company that I'm applying for, suddenly found it was making up things in companies, but that wasn't relevant. I'd never done any kind of careers coaching when I was installing GDPR. It was just a legal job I was doing, no coaching there at all, and suddenly I'm a careers coach for this company, and I'm like, no, I did GDPR. I spent 2 years learning the subject, thank you very much, AI. I don't want that taken out. So don't trust it at the moment. Be wary of it, but use it to benefit you, to give you a head start, but always go back through and refine, and don't enter into the game of automatically sending your CV via AI, because we're now working on software that's catching you out. But I think the main thing is there's a lot of people saying it isn't having any effect at the moment. They're usually not in a position to know because they're not actually using the applicant tracking systems, and those things are being updated weekly. New bots, new automated processes. So keep an eye on it. Use it to your benefit, as in giving you a head start to refine, but always go through personally, and your cover letter especially. I value a cover letter. Some recruiters say it's dead. Now, a cover letter isn't dead. If you're a good recruiter, you're going to want to look at the cover letter to find the passion, find the relevance. And if your AI has generated your cover letter, I don't need to have a degree in English to spot that. I can spot it because you're all using the same language and you're also using the same cut and paste terminology to get it through. So never cut and paste, never auto-program. Keep it true, keep it organic, it will come through and when we're looking at you. But there will be a time when if we've got, say, 1,000 applicants applying for a junior role, there is going to be a time when we're just overloaded as internal recruiters, and we're going to have to rely on that kind of appraisal of your skills in a small paragraph and then reject you, because we need to get onto the people where it identifies 100% that it is correct. And it's just, again, numbers game. AI cuts back on the numbers, it makes shortcuts, and it takes away the kind of ethical side of our recruitment. So it's down to us as internal recruiters sometimes to maintain those standards. But I would say give it another year, and it will be very standard for most entry-level applicant tracking systems to have a functional AI capability of scanning your CV and taking the decision away from us as the recruiters. So we don't trust it, and we want to preserve our jobs. They're the only two reasons at the moment. It's not really having the huge impact that people are presuming it will do.
I think that the only other thing that I would say is like take what we're saying with a grain of salt as well, because like we can only relay our experiences. Like if you apply for a job with a relatively small company, as Mark is at the moment recruiting for a producer, if there are any in the room, we can still apply. He's using a Google form. He's not going to use AI in that. However, does this mean that he's going to have to read 88 CVs at the moment? Yeah, and like make decisions.
I help for a small fee. I think he's still considering that, actually. Well, that's an important point, because I know you all personally. And so sometimes that personal relationship could be the reason you don't apply, because you want to actually keep that personal relationship going further forward. So I know we're going off subject there, but yeah.
But yeah, so as we wrap up, just wanted to ask if you had any like final words about recruitment and applying for jobs and any open positions.
Don't get into recruitment.
Okay, I did have a point. I don't know if it's a summary point, but it'd be interesting to see what you guys think about this as well. I'd say for the last 2 jobs that I interviewed for, I specifically mentioned. You can tell me if I'm lying. What I was very clear, I felt, of the things that I didn't know. I remember going into, particularly not the one I've got now, but the previous one, seeing the job spec and thinking, okay, I know this, I don't know this, I know this, I don't know this. And I was quite hesitant about saying what I don't know, but I felt like from the 2 experiences where I've had, where I've really come in early doors and said, actually, I don't know this, but off of the back of that, then saying it doesn't scare me as a challenge because I've got all this experience behind me where I've gone into things where I don't know how to solve, and I've got a record of where I've been able to demonstrate in a short period of time that I can take on an unknown challenge and deliver results. And again, coming back to the research and preparation for an interview, If there are things that technologies I don't understand or systems, and I've looked at them beforehand, I can say, okay, yeah, I don't know this, but I had a brief look before the interview, and I created an account, I had a look. It looks a little bit similar to something I've used before. I think caveating my experiences, what I do and what I don't know, has really paid off for me. I don't know if that's the generic advice that people often give, but actually being really clear and upfront about what I don't know, I think might have just been as valuable as what I do know, just because people understand who you are.
I personally, when people say, hey, you know, I've only got 8 out of 10, you've identified...
Where we have 2 more minutes before you need to go.
You've only got 8 out of 10, so actually that shows me that you've been honest. You've come to me, you've thought about it, and if those 2 out of 10... At the boot camps, I was looking for people who had 90%, not 100%. Could we refine that 10% to make you the full polished? And if your enthusiasm, your passion, your research is already there, most of us should look beyond that. I can't say for all sectors. Some sectors, it's you've got to hit the button. You've got to hit the button. But no, personally, if you're showing that enthusiasm, you've got 8 out of 10 or 90%, as I like to say, then I would take an assessment of how far short, how much training needs to be done, how much investment into your time and energy. And if you just come across as a really good person, which I'm sure you are, because that's why you got the job, that should shine through. That's me personally. I can't say every recruiter does that, because some recruiters still look at you and say there's a pound sign above your head, and that's the only thing they're interested in, both internal and external. Me, I look at the person. I want them to get a job. I don't want them turning up again unless it's a repeat bill and I can place them, but that's a different story.
Yeah. What about you, Jake? Any last words?
Yeah, I think it's a great point that there's no point in being dishonest on a CV. If you don't know something, just be honest about it. You don't know it, you're going to get caught out eventually if you lie about it and then go into the job and so suddenly, I can't do this. Surprise, because I lied. Yeah, and I think something that I've had experience with as well on CVs is people doing maybe 1 or 2 hour courses in a technology, putting it on the CV, say, yeah, I'm competent in that now. Probably not. Like I said, that you will get caught out. So definitely just keep the technologies, the things that you list on your CV to what you know, and it's definitely way worth more just being honest, saying, hey, I don't know this, but much like you said, it's an interesting challenge. I definitely want to learn more about that.
That's a brilliant response to the question. The interview, you came back at me like that. I'll be you've got me on catch-22. What do I do now? I better put you through to the hiring manager. And if you do that, it allows me to sell you to the hiring manager, because as recruiters, we actually have to sell you to the hiring manager, then the hiring manager has to sell you to the budget master. That's one of the secret people at the top most people don't talk about. So the more you can give us less wiggle room and sell yourself and sell that personality, and it gives us more ability to actually sell it to the hiring manager, because we have to come up with, like, say, 10 candidates that need to be interviewed, but we have to justify it. And they don't want to interview 10 people. They want to get on and sell, or they will do whatever it is they do. So the minimum is to have 3 or 4 people who hit the absolute mark, but sometimes we need to strong arm them as to why we think you're suitable, and those little touches, those comebacks and honesty. And again, it's me personally. I like honest candidates to say, I don't know that. Because that means that if push comes to shove, the challenge is there, deadline is there, you're going to be honest. You're going to admit to me, you can't meet the deadline. I'm going to be able to trust you a lot more, and that's a huge, huge one. So that's a really brilliant comeback. It'll be on my list of comebacks. If it isn't, it is now.
Right, well, thank you so much for joining us, folks, and thank you all for taking part. If you have any other questions, we are going to be outside. I think they do need the room after this, but yeah, if anybody has any questions, we're happy to hang around, I think, and chat a little bit. I'll need to go, but like these folks can chat. Focus, so thank you so much.